The chilling saga of Jack the Ripper begins in the dark, labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel, London, in 1888, a district plagued by poverty, crime, and despair. This was a time when industrialization had drawn thousands into the city, leading to overcrowding, rampant disease, and a stark divide between the wealthy and the destitute. The East End was a place where survival often meant resorting to desperate measures, and for many women, that included turning to prostitution. It was within this grim backdrop that the Ripper's reign of terror unfolded, targeting vulnerable women whose lives were already fraught with hardship. The killings began in late August, with Marion Nichols, a 43-year-old woman found brutally slain on Bucks Row. Her throat had been savagely cut, and her abdomen mutilated, a level of violence shocking even in a city accustomed to crime. Less than a week later, Annie Chapman met a similar fate in Hanbury Street, her body discovered with even more horrifying injuries, including the removal of her internal organs. The precision of the mutilations led some to speculate that the killer possessed medical or anatomical knowledge, a theory that would dominate discussions for years. September brought the infamous double event, in which Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on the same night. Stride's throat was slashed, but her body bore no further mutilation, leading investigators to believe the killer had been interrupted. Hours later, Eddowes' body was discovered in Mitre Square, savaged with a ferocity that seemed to escalate with each attack. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was found in her rented room on Miller's Court in November, her body so gruesomely disfigured that even seasoned investigators were horrified. Unlike the other victims, Kelly was killed indoors, suggesting a calculated shift in the killer's approach. These murders were not isolated acts of violence. They were a manifestation of the societal rot that festered in the shadows of Victorian London. The Ripper's choice of victims, poor, marginalized women, reflected the vulnerability and invisibility of those at the fringes of society. The fear these killings inspired rippled through the city, casting a long shadow over Whitechapel, where the stench of death seemed to hang in the air. Newspapers seized on the murders, sensationalizing every detail and branding the unknown assailant, Jack the Ripper, after receiving a taunting letter purportedly from the killer. While its authenticity remains debated, the letter encapsulated the morbid fascination that gripped the public. The case became a macabre spectacle, with gruesome details splashed across headlines and illustrated in lurid detail. The growing media frenzy created an atmosphere of panic, with residents wary of venturing out after dark. As the murders continued, Whitechapel became a landscape of fear and suspicion, where shadows could conceal the most heinous of crimes. Police patrolled the streets, but their efforts seemed futile, hindered by a lack of modern forensic techniques and the complexities of urban life. The streets were a melting pot of immigrants, laborers, and the destitute, making it difficult to pinpoint a suspect or even identify witnesses. Amid the chaos, the Ripper seemed to vanish as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind a trail of blood and a legacy of unanswered questions. The Whitechapel murders not only exposed the grim realities of life in Victorian London, but also highlighted the city's deep-seated issues of inequality and neglect. The police faced immense pressure, not only to catch the killer but also to address the broader societal unrest that the case symbolized. The lack of resolution would cement the Ripper's place as an enduring enigma, one that continues to haunt historians, criminologists, and storytellers alike. The context of these murders, with their brutal specificity and chilling regularity, makes them a dark mirror reflecting the desperation of a society in turmoil, a perfect storm that allowed Jack the Ripper to thrive and, ultimately, to disappear without a trace. The investigation into the Whitechapel murders, an enduring tale of frustration and failure, stands as a dark testament to the limitations of Victorian-era policing. At the time, London was undergoing rapid industrialization, and the city's infrastructure struggled to keep pace with its swelling population. Nowhere was this struggle more evident than in Whitechapel, a district marked by poverty, crime, and overcrowding. This chaotic environment provided fertile ground for Jack the Ripper to commit his heinous crimes and elude capture, frustrating law enforcement and terrifying the public. From the first murder in August 1888 to the last in November of the same year, the Metropolitan Police faced an uphill battle, constrained by rudimentary investigative techniques, bureaucratic infighting, and a deluge of false leads. Their failure to catch the killer left not only a legacy of fear, but also a trove of unanswered questions that have tantalized criminologists and historians for over a century. When Mary Ann Nichols' body was discovered on August 31, 1888, the initial response from law enforcement reflected the challenges they would face throughout the case. Her mutilated body, with a slashed throat and abdominal injuries, indicated a level of savagery rarely seen in local crimes. However, the crime scene was not secured, as the concept of preserving evidence was still in its infancy. Curious onlookers contaminated the site, and critical details were likely lost in the chaos. As the investigation began, the police quickly realized they were dealing with a crime of unusual brutality, but they lacked the tools to address it effectively. Their reliance on eyewitness accounts proved problematic in a district teeming with transient residents, many of whom were unwilling or unable to provide reliable information. Despite interviewing dozens of locals, detectives could piece together only a vague description of a man seen with Nichols shortly before her murder, a shadowy figure who would soon become synonymous with terror. As the body count rose, so too did the pressure on the Metropolitan Police. The murder of Annie Chapman on September 8, 1888, escalated the urgency of the case. Found in a backyard on Hanbury Street, Chapman's body bore signs of even greater mutilation than Nichols', with organs removed in a manner suggesting anatomical knowledge. This led investigators to theorize that the killer might possess medical training, possibly a surgeon or a butcher. However, this theory was far from conclusive, as many argued that such injuries could be inflicted by anyone with a basic understanding of anatomy and a sharp blade. The police's inability to confirm or refute this theory highlighted their reliance on conjecture rather than concrete evidence. The lack of forensic science meant that investigators had no means to link physical evidence to suspects, leaving them to rely heavily on circumstantial details and witness statements that were often inconsistent or contradictory. The infamous double event on the night of September 30, 1888, underscored the Ripper's ability to outwit his pursuers. Elizabeth Stride was found with her throat slashed in Dutfield's yard, but the lack of further mutilation suggested the killer had been interrupted. Just 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes' body was discovered in Mitre Square, brutally disfigured in a manner consistent with the earlier murders. The proximity of the two crimes both in time and location baffled investigators, who struggled to understand how the killer could navigate Whitechapel's crowded streets without being seen or apprehended. A cryptic clue left near Eddowes' crime scene. A piece of her bloodied apron found beneath graffiti reading, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," only deepened the mystery. The message was hastily removed by police to prevent anti-Semitic riots, a decision that has been heavily criticized by modern analysts for destroying potential evidence. This incident epitomized the chaotic nature of the investigation, where the need to maintain public order often clashed with the pursuit of justice. Internal divisions within law enforcement further hampered the investigation. The Whitechapel murders occurred at the border of jurisdictions managed by the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, two organizations with a history of rivalry and poor communication. The lack of cooperation between these forces led to fragmented efforts and missed opportunities. For example, detectives from each jurisdiction often pursued separate lines of inquiry without sharing findings, duplicating work and wasting valuable time. The resignation of Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren in November 1888 further destabilized the investigation, leaving a leadership vacuum at a critical juncture. Warren's departure was fueled in part by public criticism of the police's inability to capture the Ripper, as well as his controversial decision to ban public demonstrations in Trafalgar Square, which had eroded his support within the force. The role of the press in the investigation was a double-edged sword. Newspapers brought widespread attention to the murders, ensuring that the case remained a topic of national and even international concern. Sensational headlines and graphic illustrations fueled public fascination, but they also spread misinformation and created additional challenges for investigators. Letters purportedly from the killer, such as the Dear Boss letter and the infamous From Hell letter, were published in the press, generating a media frenzy. While these letters provided tantalizing clues, their authenticity remains a subject of debate, and they likely diverted resources from more productive lines of inquiry. Hoaxes and false reports flooded the police, forcing them to sift through a mountain of irrelevant information in search of genuine leads. The press also fueled public hysteria, with stories of the Ripper's supposed supernatural abilities or links to secret societies capturing imaginations and further complicating the search for the truth. Despite their best efforts, investigators were unable to develop a coherent profile of the killer. Theories abounded, ranging from the Ripper being a deranged local resident to a wealthy outsider who traveled to Whitechapel to commit his crimes before returning to the safety of his privileged life. The latter theory was bolstered by the belief that the killer possessed some level of education and refinement, as evidenced by the precision of the mutilations and the apparent planning of the murders. However, these assumptions were based more on Victorian social prejudices than on solid evidence. The idea that such brutal acts could be committed by an unassuming member of the working class was difficult for many to accept, leading to a focus on suspects who fit the image of a sinister gentleman or a foreign outsider. This bias may have blinded investigators to more plausible suspects and contributed to the case's lack of resolution. The failure to capture Jack the Ripper had far-reaching implications, both for the victims' families and for the city as a whole. The murders exposed the harsh realities of life in Whitechapel, drawing attention to issues of poverty, inequality, and urban neglect that had long been ignored by the upper classes. In the years following the case, there were calls for police reform and the modernization of investigative techniques. While progress was slow, the lessons learned from the Ripper investigation eventually contributed to the development of forensic science and more effective policing methods. Yet, for all its historical significance, the case remains an enduring mystery, a chilling reminder of the limits of human knowledge and the depths of human depravity. The investigation into Jack the Ripper is a story of frustration, failure, and the enduring allure of the unknown. It is a testament to the challenges of solving crimes in a rapidly changing world and a stark reminder of the human cost of societal neglect. Over a century later, the questions it raises continue to haunt us. Who was Jack the Ripper? How did he evade capture? And what does his story tell us about the society in which he lived? These questions remain unanswered, leaving the Ripper's shadow to linger over Whitechapel and the annals of criminal history. As the investigation into the Whitechapel murders unfolded, public fascination and police scrutiny converged on a myriad of potential suspects. The lack of concrete evidence led to a proliferation of theories, each shaped by contemporary prejudices, emerging forensic insights, and the sensationalism of the press. Over the years, the list of suspects has grown to include local residents, foreign immigrants, professionals with medical knowledge, and even members of the British aristocracy. Each suspect, from known criminals to innocuous citizens, has been dissected under the lens of modern criminology and historical analysis, creating a tangled web of possibilities that only deepens the mystery surrounding Jack the Ripper's identity. One of the earliest suspects was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher whose name emerged in police reports after his death in December 1888. Druitt's suicide in the River Thames, just weeks after the final canonical murder, fueled speculation that he was the Ripper. Contemporary accounts described him as being mentally unstable, and some theorized that his descent into madness culminated in the Whitechapel killings. However, little evidence links Druitt directly to the murders, and his inclusion as a suspect may have been influenced more by his tragic demise than by substantive proof. Despite this, Druitt remains a fixture in Ripper lore, emblematic of the desperate attempts to assign culpability in the absence of definitive clues. Another prominent suspect was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who worked as a barber in Whitechapel. Kosminski's name appears frequently in police records, and he was reportedly identified by an eyewitness as the killer, although the details of this identification remain murky. Diagnosed with severe mental illness, Kosminski was committed to an asylum in 1891, where he lived until his death. Some modern researchers have pointed to DNA evidence extracted from a shawl purportedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes as linking Kosminski to the crime, though the reliability of this evidence has been hotly debated. Kosminski's case illustrates the challenges of reconciling historical documentation with contemporary forensic techniques, as well as the biases that may have influenced the original investigation. Dr. Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American quack doctor, also found himself under suspicion. Tumblety was known for his misogynistic views and his collection of anatomical specimens, which included female organs. Arrested in connection with unrelated charges, Tumblety fled to the United States shortly after the Whitechapel murders, evading further scrutiny. While some argue that his behavior and interests align with the profile of the Ripper, others contend that his notoriety and flamboyance make it unlikely he could have operated with the stealth required to avoid detection. Tumblety's case highlights the role of public perception in shaping the list of suspects, as his unconventional lifestyle made him an easy target for suspicion. Perhaps the most controversial theory implicates members of the British royal family. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, has been suggested as a suspect, largely due to his proximity to the events and his rumored connections to the victims. Proponents of this theory argue that the murders were part of a cover-up to conceal a scandal involving the prince, though historians widely regard these claims as unfounded. Similarly, Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's physician, has been implicated in conspiracy theories that depict the murders as part of a Masonic plot. These theories, while captivating, rely more on speculative fiction than on empirical evidence, serving as a reminder of the allure of conspiracy in the face of unanswered questions. The list of suspects extends beyond these prominent figures to include countless others, from petty criminals to respected professionals. Figures such as George Chapman, a convicted poisoner, James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant whose alleged diary confessed to the murders, and Thomas Cutbush, a delusional asylum inmate, each offer tantalizing possibilities but lack definitive proof. The diversity of suspects reflects not only the complexity of the case but also the societal anxieties of the time, as fears of immigration, class unrest, and gender violence colored perceptions of the killer's identity. Each new theory adds a layer of intrigue to the enduring mystery, ensuring that the search for Jack the Ripper's identity remains as compelling today as it was in 1888. The cultural impact of the Jack the Ripper case extends far beyond the gruesome murders themselves, shaping literature, media, and public imagination in ways that persist to this day. From the moment the first crime was reported, the case captured the Victorian public's morbid curiosity, turning the streets of Whitechapel into a stage for fear and speculation. The combination of brutal killings, sensationalist press coverage, and the tantalizing anonymity of the murderer created a legend that transcended its grim origins. Over the decades, the Ripper has become both a symbol of urban terror and a fixture of popular culture, inspiring countless works of fiction, film, and academic study. This enduring fascination speaks to the deep psychological and societal resonances of the case, as well as its role as a touchstone for discussions of crime, justice, and human nature. One of the most immediate cultural impacts of the Ripper case was its influence on Victorian literature. The murders occurred during a period of burgeoning interest in detective fiction, with authors like Arthur Conan Doyle and Wilkie Collins shaping the genre's early contours. The Ripper case, with its labyrinthine mystery and flawed investigation, provided fertile ground for writers exploring themes of crime and detection. Doyle himself reportedly speculated on the case, contributing to the era's fascination with the figure of the detective as both a solver of puzzles and a moral arbiter. The Ripper's anonymity also influenced the portrayal of villains in literature, inspiring characters who lurked in the shadows, embodying the fears of an increasingly urbanized society. This literary legacy laid the groundwork for the modern crime genre, where the figure of the serial killer often mirrors the mythos of Jack the Ripper. In the realm of journalism, the Ripper case marked a turning point in the relationship between the press and the public. The intense media coverage, fueled by lurid headlines and graphic illustrations, created an unprecedented level of engagement with a criminal case. Newspapers competed fiercely for exclusive information, often resorting to sensationalism and speculation to captivate readers. This era of yellow journalism not only shaped public perceptions of the Ripper, but also highlighted the power of the media to influence narratives and fuel moral panics. The coverage of the case set a precedent for the modern true crime genre, where the interplay between media, public interest, and law enforcement continues to shape the way crimes are reported and remembered. The figure of Jack the Ripper has also permeated popular culture, appearing in a wide range of artistic and entertainment mediums. From early stage plays to contemporary films and television series, the Ripper's story has been retold and reimagined countless times, each iteration reflecting the cultural anxieties of its era. In the early 20th century, Films like Alfred Hitchcock's The Lodger drew on the Ripper legend to explore themes of suspicion and paranoia. More recent adaptations, such as the graphic novel and film From Hell, have delved into the socio-political dimensions of the case, examining issues of class, gender, and power. The Ripper's presence in popular culture underscores his transformation from a historical criminal into a mythic figure, embodying universal fears and questions about the nature of evil. Beyond fiction, the Ripper case has had a profound impact on the fields of criminology and forensic science. The failures of the original investigation highlighted the need for more systematic approaches to crime solving, spurring advancements in fingerprint analysis, blood typing, and psychological profiling. Modern criminologists often use the Ripper case as a case study in the evolution of investigative techniques, as well as a cautionary tale about the dangers of bias and assumption in criminal investigations. The Ripper's elusiveness has also inspired the development of geographic profiling and other methodologies aimed at understanding the behavior and movements of serial offenders. In this sense, the case has contributed to the professionalization of criminal investigation, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond its immediate historical context. The cultural impact of Jack the Ripper also raises important ethical and philosophical questions. The commodification of the case, from Ripper-themed tours in Whitechapel to memorabilia and merchandise, has sparked debates about the line between historical interest and exploitation. For some, the fascination with the Ripper represents a macabre curiosity that trivializes the suffering of the victims and their families. For others, it serves as a lens through which to explore broader issues of social justice, inequality, and the human capacity for violence. These debates highlight the complexity of the Ripper's legacy, as well as the enduring challenge of reconciling historical memory with contemporary values. The cultural resonance of the Jack the Ripper case underscores its status as more than just a historical crime. It is a symbol, a myth, and a mirror reflecting the fears and fascinations of each generation. As new theories and interpretations continue to emerge, the Ripper's shadow looms large over both the history of crime and the human imagination, ensuring that his story remains a subject of endless intrigue and debate. Montague John Druitt remains one of the most intriguing suspects in the case of Jack the Ripper, one whose name continues to be discussed in the annals of criminology, despite the fact that no conclusive evidence ever firmly identified him as the murderer. The story of Druitt begins in the mid-1800s, where he was born into a respectable family, seemingly destined for a life of academic success and professional prominence. Yet, it is his mental instability and the mysterious circumstances of his death that have kept his name closely linked to the unsolved puzzle of the Ripper murders. Born on August 15, 1857, in Wimborne Minster, Dorset, Montague John Druitt was the son of a prominent surgeon. His family background provided him with a strong educational foundation, and by the time he reached adulthood, he was well on his way to becoming a barrister, a profession that allowed him to earn a respectable living. But as the years passed, a picture emerged of a man who was increasingly burdened by mental health issues, particularly as he grew older. He struggled with bouts of depression and a sense of deep personal disillusionment. Those close to Druitt reported that his mental state had deteriorated, and several accounts from friends and family members suggested that he had become emotionally unstable, perhaps exacerbated by a series of personal and professional setbacks. Druitt's struggle with his mental health is essential to understanding why his name has been suggested as a potential suspect in the Ripper case. His mental condition, which was never officially diagnosed, combined with his personal frustrations, could have created an environment ripe for violent outbursts. It is this vulnerability, combined with his apparent emotional isolation, that has led some to speculate that he may have found solace in committing horrific acts of violence, the most brutal and infamous of them being the 5 murders of women attributed to Jack the Ripper in 1888. The key factor that first brought Druitt into the Ripper investigation was his sudden disappearance in late 1888, shortly after the last canonical murder, that of Mary Kelly. The timing of his disappearance, just as the murders ceased, was remarkable. Druitt's body was found floating in the Thames on December 31, 1888, and the death was ruled as suicide by drowning. What made this discovery even more significant was the sudden nature of his death, which occurred just weeks after the murders of Mary Kelly and others had ended. This led some to believe that Druitt's death was not just an unfortunate accident or a result of personal despair, but could have been tied to his role as the Ripper. The most compelling evidence that links Drut to the murders is the timing of his death, occurring immediately after the murders ceased. While the theory that Drut was Jack the Ripper hinges largely on circumstantial evidence, it cannot be dismissed outright, given the oddities of his death and the lack of any other plausible explanation for the sudden cessation of the killings. Some theorists argue that Drut, overwhelmed by guilt, may have decided to end his own life after the final murder. His death, they contend, could have been the emotional release he needed to end his reign of terror. This theory, while speculative, has remained a topic of debate in the years following the Ripper killings. Adding weight to the theory of Drut's involvement is a report by Sir Melville Macnaghten, a high-ranking police official in the 1890s. In 1894, Macnaghten included Drut as a prime suspect in a memorandum, making him one of the few suspects whose name was officially recognized by the police at the time. In this memorandum, Macnaghten described Drut as a barrister of good family who had been sexually insane and who had been driven to violence by his emotional instability. Macnaghten's report remains one of the most significant documents in the Ripper investigation, and it suggests that at least some members of the police force at the time considered Drut to be a viable suspect. Yet, it is important to note that Macnaghten's memorandum did not definitively confirm Drut's guilt, but instead presented him as a possible suspect among a few others. Despite this official mention, critics of the Drut theory argue that the evidence against him is far from conclusive. One of the main points of contention is the lack of physical evidence linking Drut to the crime scenes. No blood, clothing fibers, or personal items were found to directly connect him to any of the murder sites. Additionally, it is argued that the Ripper's crimes exhibited a level of careful planning and precision that may not have been consistent with Drut's mental state. His instability, while possibly driving him to commit acts of violence, might not have been compatible with the highly organized nature of the Ripper murders. Many Ripperologists, or experts on the case, have suggested that the crimes were committed by someone who had a more calculated, almost methodical approach to murder, which they argue would have been beyond Drut's ability, given his mental health issues. In addition to these critiques, there is also the issue of timing. While Drut's death came soon after the last murder, the idea that his suicide marked the end of the killings is purely speculative. The Ripper murders did cease, but there is no definitive evidence that Drut's death was the cause of this cessation. It is possible that other factors, such as the increased police presence or the fact that the Ripper had already completed his spree, were more responsible for the murder stopping. As with many theories surrounding the identity of Jack the Ripper, the cessation of the murders remains one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. The fact that no additional victims were found after November 1888 has led some to argue that the killer had either moved away or been apprehended, though neither of these possibilities has ever been confirmed. Even though the case against Drut remains speculative, several factors make him a particularly intriguing suspect. His background as a barrister, his apparent knowledge of law enforcement procedures, and his ability to navigate society without raising suspicion are all factors that make him a plausible candidate for the role of Jack the Ripper. The fact that Drut was a member of a well-respected family also means that he may have been able to blend into respectable society, which may explain why he was not immediately suspected by the police. Additionally, Drut's apparent isolation, coupled with his failure to establish meaningful relationships with women, may have played a significant role in motivating the murders. The Ripper's choice of victims, typically prostitutes or women of low social standing, may suggest that the killer harbored deep resentment toward women. Some theorists have posited that the Ripper's acts were driven by a deep-seated hatred of women, and Drut's apparent lack of success in his personal life could have made him susceptible to these feelings. His emotional instability, combined with his frustrations with his personal life, may have served as a catalyst for the violent outbursts that characterized the Ripper murders. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the theory that Montague John Drut was Jack the Ripper remains one of the most prominent and widely discussed theories in the ongoing search for the killer's identity. The connection between his death and the cessation of the murders is tantalizing, and the theories surrounding his involvement continue to captivate both historians and armchair detectives alike. Drut's name will likely remain a central figure in the investigation into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in history. As modern forensic techniques, such as DNA testing and the analysis of crime scene evidence, have continued to evolve, new insights into the Ripper case may eventually shed light on the identity of the killer. However, Even with these advancements, the case of Jack the Ripper remains one of the most elusive in criminal history. For now, Montague John Druitt's name remains etched in the pages of the Ripper case, representing the enduring mystery of an identity that may never be known. Whether or not Druitt was the Ripper is a question that may never be definitively answered, but his story will always be part of the chilling legend of Jack the Ripper. The mystery surrounding the identity of Jack the Ripper has captivated the imagination of historians, criminologists, and the public for over a century. The killer's ability to evade capture, combined with the brutality and precision of his murders, led to a host of theories, many of which continue to challenge our understanding of the crimes. From the official suspects named by the police during the investigation to more fringe conspiracy theories, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains a subject of intense debate. In this section, we'll examine some of the most significant theories and conspiracies that have emerged over the years regarding the identity of the Ripper, diving into a variety of suspects and potential motivations. The royal conspiracy theory Prince Albert Victor. Perhaps the most widely debated conspiracy theory is the claim that Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence and the grandson of Queen Victoria, was Jack the Ripper. This theory suggests that the royal family, seeking to protect the monarchy's reputation, orchestrated a cover-up to prevent the public from learning the truth about Prince Albert's involvement in the murders. The theory gained traction largely due to a book written in 1970 by Stephen Knight titled Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution, which proposed that the prince had been involved in a secret relationship with a commoner, and his subsequent murder spree was a result of this scandalous affair. According to this conspiracy theory, Prince Albert Victor, who was reported to have been mentally unstable and possibly suffering from syphilis, had become enraged by the prospect of his relationship being exposed. As a member of the royal family, he allegedly had the means and influence to orchestrate the murders without detection. The theory further suggests that his involvement was covered up by powerful figures within the British establishment who sought to protect the royal family from embarrassment and scandal. However, the theory has been widely criticized due to the lack of credible evidence linking Prince Albert to the murders. Critics point to several significant flaws in the royal conspiracy theory. For one, there is no concrete proof that Prince Albert Victor even had any connection to the East End or frequented the areas where the murders took place. Additionally, his medical condition would likely have made it difficult for him to carry out the gruesome killings attributed to the Ripper. Despite these weaknesses, the theory remains one of the most prominent conspiracy theories in the history of the Ripper case, often cited in popular culture and speculative works. The case of Aaron Kosminski. The suspect with a stronger connection, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant living in London at the time of the murders, is one of the most widely considered suspects in the Jack the Ripper case. Kosminski's name first emerged as a potential suspect in police reports and internal memos, particularly in the 1890s. He was known to have been living in the Whitechapel area and was considered by some members of the police to be a likely candidate for the murders. The fact that he had a history of mental illness, including symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, made him a plausible suspect in the eyes of some investigators. Kosminski was reportedly seen in the vicinity of several of the crime scenes, and he had a known history of hostility toward women. This, coupled with his erratic behavior, led some to speculate that he may have been driven to murder as a result of his psychological issues. It is believed that Kosminski had a particular animus toward prostitutes, which could have motivated him to target women who were working in the streets of Whitechapel. In 2014, a team of researchers made headlines by suggesting that DNA evidence found on a shawl from one of the Ripper's victims, Catherine Eddowes, could be linked to Aaron Kosminski. The DNA analysis allegedly identified a match to Kosminski's relatives, though this claim has been met with skepticism by many in the scientific community. Some argue that the DNA evidence could have been contaminated or misinterpreted, and therefore cannot be considered definitive proof of Kosminski's guilt. While Kosminski remains a strong contender among traditional suspects, his involvement is far from proven. Much of the evidence connecting him to the crimes is circumstantial, and there are other plausible suspects with similar connections to the murders. Nonetheless, the theory that Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper continues to be discussed in academic circles and is often regarded as one of the more credible suspects based on the available evidence. The theory of Walter Sickert, the artist as the Ripper. Another theory that has gained considerable attention over the years is the suggestion that the Ripper was the British artist Walter Sickert. This theory was popularized by crime writer Patricia Cornwell, whose 2002 book Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed argued that Sickert was the man behind the murders. Cornwell based her theory on an analysis of Sickert's paintings, as well as alleged evidence that he had been obsessed with the murders and had even written about them in his letters. Cornwell's theory focuses on the idea that Sickert had a deep, pathological fascination with death and mutilation, and that he channeled these desires into his artwork. Some of Sickert's paintings, such as the Camden Town Murder and the Ripper's Shadow, are thought to contain visual references to the killings, which has led some to believe that the artist may have been expressing his involvement in the murders through his art. Cornwell also pointed to various supposed links between Sickert and the crime scenes, including the alleged presence of Sickert's fingerprints on a letter sent by the Ripper. However, the Sickert theory has faced substantial criticism. Many art historians have dismissed the idea that Sickert's paintings contain clues about the Ripper, and there is little concrete evidence to support the idea that the artist was involved in the murders. In addition, some have pointed out that the theory relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and the interpretation of Sickert's work, rather than on any solid, verifiable facts. Nevertheless, the idea that an artist with a dark obsession could have been the Ripper remains a compelling one for some, and continues to be a subject of fascination. The theory of James Maybrick, the murderous merchant. Another suspect who has gained attention in recent years is James Maybrick, a wealthy Liverpool merchant. Maybrick's name became linked to the Ripper case in 1992 when a purported diary of his was discovered, which allegedly contained confessions to the murders. The diary, which was written in a style reminiscent of the Ripper's own letters, describes in graphic detail the killings and appears to suggest that Maybrick was the murderer. The discovery of the diary, which was found in a long-forgotten attic, raised eyebrows among those interested in the Ripper case. While some believed that the diary could be the missing piece of the puzzle, others were skeptical about its authenticity. The fact that the diary surfaced over a century after the murders raised questions about its credibility, and many experts have dismissed it as a hoax. Despite the controversy surrounding the diary, the theory that James Maybrick was Jack the Ripper continues to be discussed in Ripperology circles. Maybrick's own background adds a layer of intrigue to this theory. He was known to have been in poor health and had a history of erratic behavior, including a strained marriage to his wife, Florence. Some have suggested that his relationship with Florence, which was marked by allegations of infidelity, may have contributed to his descent into madness and violence. The notion that Maybrick could have been driven to commit the murders out of jealousy or anger fits within the narrative of a man who was emotionally disturbed and prone to violent outbursts. Like the other theories, the case against Maybrick is not without its flaws. The authenticity of the diary remains in question, and there is no concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime scenes. Nonetheless, the theory that James Maybrick was Jack the Ripper continues to be a popular topic for Ripperologists and remains one of the more controversial and sensational theories in the case. Theories of a group conspiracy, Freemasons and the Ripper murders. One of the more sensational conspiracy theories surrounding Jack the Ripper suggests that the murders were part of a larger cover-up involving powerful figures within society, such as Freemasons. This theory posits that the Ripper murders were not the actions of a lone killer, but rather the work of a group of men who sought to conceal a dark secret. According to this theory, the Freemasons, who were highly influential in London at the time, were involved in the killings as part of a conspiracy to protect their own members from exposure. The Freemason theory gained popularity in the early 20th century, particularly after the publication of The Ripper's Secret by author Stephen Knight. Knight's book argued that the murders were part of a cover-up involving the Freemasons, who were allegedly protecting one of their own members from exposure as the father of an illegitimate child. According to this theory, the victim's murder was not random, but rather a targeted hit meant to protect the Freemasons' secrets. This theory suggests that the murders were not solely about violence, but were designed to prevent a scandal from tarnishing the reputation of the Freemasons. Critics of this theory argue that there is little evidence to support the claim that the murders were orchestrated by a secret society, and many see the theory as little more than sensationalism. Nonetheless, the idea that the Ripper murders were part of a larger conspiracy involving powerful figures continues to intrigue those who believe that there is more to the case than what the official records suggest.